How's it going? I made a Roman bench. My design was based off of Rex Kruger's design. His was based off of Chris Schwartz's, and his was a recreation of a real Roman bench found at Herculaneum that dates back to 79 AD. So this is a 2,000-year-old design. Schwartz's, because it's a recreation, it's made out of a single slab of hardwood. That's really expensive and hard to work with compared to Kruger's design. His was making it easier and cheaper so people could actually make them. It's made out of 2x4s. And then my version is 2 feet shorter than his. His was 7 feet long, this is 5. And then I also wanted to add a shelf to the underside, but you'll see where that goes. Anyway, want to see how I made it? So the first step in the construction is board preparation. I've got 6 10-foot 2x4s and I need to cut them down to 5 foot. I'll start by marking the 5-foot line and then cut it with a knife and a chisel to create something called a knife wall, which will help direct the saw to make a nice, square, straight cut. As I was cutting it, I realized I needed to support at least one of the boards completely, instead of each one halfway. I ended up propping the end of the board on the hood of the car, which didn't scratch the paint, so it's fine, but it wasn't ideal. But later I ended up using that aquarium there to support the second board, and it worked out for the rest of them. In retrospect, I really should have just clamped them down, but I had 6 boards to cut, and I wanted to do it quickly, and it worked out in the end. But that's cutting a board in half. Okay, so I finished cutting them in half. I decided that I only wanted 9 of them instead of 11. 9 is a good width. And now I've already started on arranging them such that they fit together really well. They'll be nice and flat. And rearranging them around so that way it'll be less work for me to get them all to fit together. So, this will probably take a good bit of work. I've got some pretty warped wood, but yeah, I think it's about set up. I do have to flip them all around so that way the grain is running in the same direction. That'll make it easier to maintain and to build. So, that's what I'm about to do. So, I have arranged the wood as best I can, so where all of the grain is running this way. Hopefully, the grain's really all over the place and there's a lot of knots in this wood, so this is the best that I could do. I'm now going to mark it with a cabinet maker's square, so that way I can keep track of the orientation. I'm also going to mark the end of the grain just in case I get turned around. I want all of these arrows pointing the same direction. This is going to be the bench top. I've also arranged it so there's the least amount of knots on the top of the wood than on the underside, because the underside doesn't really matter. I'm not going to be working on the underside. I will be working on this side, so it's be good. So now that I've got this set up as best I can, I'm going to plane each of the faces so that way there's less bowing going on. So that'll be next. Okay, I realized you couldn't see what I was doing, so you can now see cabinet maker's triangle. I don't think you can see the arrows. There are arrows on the end, like that, so I can keep track. And now I need to diagnose where all the bowing is, so I know what I need to get rid of. By the looks of it, this one's bowed pretty bad. This one's bowed, and I know this one is bowed because it rocks back and forth, so I need to take off material in the middle here. Arrow, so I know which direction. This one is making contact on the ends on this side, and right here, so I need to take off material that much. Material on the ends. Alright, that's a lot of planing. Let's get to it. My first job in planing was to smooth the surfaces of the boards, because they still had pretty rough milling marks that needed removal. Then, I needed to focus on the high spots, which I had already marked out, and take them down in order to flatten out the board. Right now, I'm using something called a planing stop, which is just a small bent piece of metal that holds the piece steady with these little teeth that bite into the wood slightly, holding on to it and keeping it in place, provided that I'm planing towards the planing stop. If I plane in any other direction, it'll move the piece away from those teeth and won't keep it steady anymore. Taking way too heavy of a cut. It's jamming up a lot. I'm getting a lot of stutter and chatter. You know, Paul Sollers always says, planing is a good workout. I don't think I quite understood that until now. So, it'll be a lot of that. A lot of planing. A lot of planing. I'm going to take a little break. And then I'm going to finish the rest of this up off camera. So, it's a new day. It's a little bit cooler out, so I kind of need a sweater. And I've been doing some planing work, and I'm noticing a problem with my number 5 here. I'm noticing that the shavings are getting jammed in the mouth, which is the gap I think before I've said that it was the opening in the plane. It's actually the gap between the iron and the front of the opening. I'm really having a problem where shavings are getting lodged into it a lot. It's really a problem. I think it's the chip breaker, and which is a piece of metal. It is this piece of metal, this curved one. I think I need to tighten up the gap. While I'm at it, I might as well sharpen the iron. So, that's what I'm about to do. I've done quite a bit of planing. It's getting there, it's pretty close. But one of the boards is still really bowed, which is basically, in woodworking we never use the word warped. We have specific words for the different ways that a piece of wood warps. So bowing is when a piece of wood like this is curved this way. Okay? It's twisted if this side is higher than this side, and it'll twist. So this, if that side's higher, this side will be higher. And then the other one's cupping, where it'll warp this way. And this piece is quite bowed, I'm noticing. So, I'm going to get my sharpening set up, and we'll get to that. Alright, so, got everything set up. I have 4 diamond plates, aluminum, I think. And I've got my iron and chip breaker here, which you can actually see now, I believe. That's the way you do this, because you don't want the chip breaker to go over the edge and hit the edge of the iron. You want to preserve that. So what you do is you loosen the screw, you pull it back, twist, and then pull it forward. And there you go. So, forgot how dirty this is. So, what you do, put a little bit of oil on the stone, and then you just run it back and forth until it's flat. The way you check it is you put it behind the light. Let's see if any light pokes through. No, I'm not seeing any. So, I would imagine that my problem is the mouth and not the chip breaker. But, since we're here, I'm going to tune this up. I'm going to start with the 1000 grit stone. And I'm going to stick this in my honing guide here, which just holds the iron at the right angle to preserve the bevel. Stick it in here. And it has measurements on the side for getting the right projection to keep the angle. But what I do, because it's faster, is I just put it down on the bench and look at it and see if it's all making contact. And it's pretty close. There we go. Just about perfect. So I'm going to tighten that up. Gonna get some oil on the stone. Get to work. What you want to do when you're sharpening, you just want to go until you can feel a burr on the edge of the iron, and that means you're done. There we go. So that's about done. So I'm going to move on to the 1200 grit. Some oil on the stone. Take it to the edge. Just going to flip the burr. Anyway, now, burrs on the front side, and we start over. And there we go. That's about it. Now, something you probably couldn't notice is that the iron is very slightly cambered, so it's curved instead of straight. And we do that because we don't want the corner, when you're planing, if the corner is making contact, it'll leave this line called a track, and we don't want those. So what you do is you grind the corners off just a little bit, so that way when it's sticking out of the plane, the corners aren't making contact with the wood. Then I have this piece of fake leather with strop egg compound on it. And I'm just going to run it back and forth on the strop. Take it out. So I can do the back. And you do this until there isn't a burr, and that means it's nice and sharp. So now we put the chip breaker back on, which is the same process as taking it off, just in reverse. And that's it. That's sharpening. So, made some progress. Mostly planed up now. Just a couple of little gaps that I need to take care of. But I've run into a problem. I don't have clamps that are big enough for the glue up. So, I've designed this, which is a couple of 2x4s. One of them is clamped to the bench top, and then this one's loose. And then there are wedges between the loose one and the clamped down one. And then I pound them in, and that puts pressure on all of these. It tightens it up as if I was using a bunch of clamps. And from here, I can now see what issues I still need to deal with. And I can also see that this is probably going to work for the actual glue up once I'm there. But that's my progress so far. I'm mostly done. It's just a couple more boards that are still bowed pretty badly that I need to take care of. But yeah, I think this is going to work. While you enjoy the sound of the leaves being raked, I'm using the side of the plane as a straight edge to make sure the board is flat on its faces. I'm doing this because I noticed that in bowed pieces that I had already worked down, I was having trouble getting them to line up with each other until I realized that they weren't actually flat and smooth. I ended up having to do this quite a bit. Most of the boards had some amount of issues with them being flat and smooth. On this board, I've noticed that it's twisted, and so I'm using a pair of makeshift winding sticks to see how badly and in what direction. Winding sticks are basically two boards that are parallel with each other that exaggerate the twist of a board, making it easier to see. You use them by getting down on the level with them and seeing if they line up with each other. I ended up having to do this quite a bit because a lot of the boards were twisted. So, I finished planing the boards. They all fit together pretty well. But before I can do the glue up, I need to do some stuff to this board. This is the centermost board. I need to cut this block off, so in the glue up I can move it over 2 inches or 1.5 inches or something. That's for a work holding hole that'll be through the bench. It's easier to cut it than to chop it later. And then I'm also going to put a notch on the underside for the vertical support of the underside shelf. It's going to mortise in to the underside in the center, and I didn't want to chop it, so I'm just going to cut a notch out and fit the tenon to this notch, and that should work. But okay, so now that the sides of the notch are cut, I'm going to flip it onto its side and chop it out. Well, it isn't pretty, but you know what? It's good enough. And I want to get to gluing, so yeah. Alright, so I put some plastic down so that way it won't stick to the table. These are the extra boards. I've got half of them, or 4 of them, here, ready for the glue up. And yeah. So that's the first half, and in, I don't know, like an hour, I'll do the other one, and then I can set up the whole thing and put it all together in one big glue up. So, it seems like the glue up went pretty well. As you can see, it's not exactly as I described. So for Christmas, I ended up with a bunch of bar clamps. So we decided to throw those across the top because my whole clamping thing puts a lot of force on the underside, but not on the top. So this kind of balances it out. But we were having a problem when we were setting this up where the 2x4s that are clamped to the bench top kept sliding, and so we had to clamp them together. That's what this one's doing, to help them stay in place better. But the next day, and it's about ready to disassemble. I'm going to start with the external bar clamps and 2x4s, or pipe clamps. Okay, I'm now going to, I guess, take off the 2x4s. We screwed this board down because it keeps slipping. There we go. So I ended up having to use longer wedges because these ones were too short and too thin, and so they didn't want to hold it very well. These did a much better job. Now for the top bar clamps. Okay. Now I need to break off these ones. These are the cawls. There we go. All right. So here's the bench top, all glued up. Now to get the plastic out from under it, because I think it's glued to it. Still some wet glue under here. There's also a bunch of shavings stuck down here. That was from using handfuls of shavings to wipe off excess glue. Bench top's done. Big solid piece of wood. Here I'm marking and trimming down one of the ends, which was more ragged because not all the boards are the same length, and I used the other end to square them up. I'm using basically the same technique as before. At points, you'll see me holding the saw almost horizontally. What I'm attempting to do is use the saw to create a kerf, which is a shallow saw cut, to better help me stay on the line and work through the whole piece. This isn't an easy cut, and took quite a bit of time. Here you'll notice that I was having trouble with the sawhorse rocking, so I had to put my foot up on it. So I'm now marking out where the legs are going to go, where the mortise is going to be, and exactly the angles that I'm going to have to cut them at. So I've struck this line at 9 inches. That'll be where they are roughly from the end. And then from the sides they're 3.5 inches, which should be about halfway through the third one. Seems to be right. Okay. So now, the legs have to be at an angle like this, at 32 degrees. I have this bevel gauge this comedically large bevel gauge set up to that angle, so that way I can just line it up on the side, just like that, and then strike the line. So these are guides for when I'm boring the holes, because I need to hold it so that way it's going in this direction. So I've got the brace and bit here, and this is going to take a long time, especially considering the fact that I have to do 4 of them. But we'll get it done. Should probably tape that down. So I'm going to have this as a guide to make sure that I'm holding it at the right angle. Now the problem is, the bevel gauge I have is really long, so it kind of gets in the way. But we'll see. Hopefully I could start it at the right angle and then just move it and keep it the right angle, correct angle. So what you do with this is put it in the right spot, and then you start straight up and down. You go until the knickers cut a circle, like that, and then you pull it back out, match the angle, and go. It's at an awkward angle. But it seems like I'm doing it right. Just so you know, by the way, I know exactly how crazy I look. But I'm having a problem where the wood is too soft, and the snail, so the end of this bit has this little screw thing. That's called the snail. And what it does is it pulls the bit down into the wood, so that way I can do the cutting. But my problem is that the wood I'm working with is too soft, and the snail on the bit I'm using is too dull, and so it's just grinding a hole, a conical hole, instead of pulling it down. So I'm having to put a lot of pressure into it to get it to go down, which means that I'm sitting like a lunatic. More than halfway, so double all of that and put it through. And also keep in mind that a good portion of this was cut out because it was too much. So I'm using an adapter to be able to put this hex end bit into the brace and bit. And apparently it isn't made very well because it is now the chuck of the brace is now grinding into the adapter and leaving little metal flakes everywhere and grooves in the bit, or in the adapter. So this is kind of annoying. I want to make this also very clear. It is December 27th as of currently recording it. And it's somewhere in the high 70s right now. Here we go. Success. So, that took a long time, and I have 3 more to do. So, yeah. So, I wanted to take a brief intermission from all of the boring, which I'm now about halfway through the second mortise. But I'm having some problems with this bit. So, I sharpened it up, and it's doing better, but this adapter is really starting to be a problem, because now, so the adapter has this little screw here. I cannot move it by hand. I can't. I don't know what the problem is. Something is in the threads of the screw, and I have to get a wrench, or pliers. I have to get pliers to move this screw. I don't know what the problem is. I was able to take it completely out with pliers, and there's nothing in it. So, I don't know what the deal is, but it sucks. So, Tay Tools, fix your adapter. And I guess this is a call-out post now. I also found out another way of putting force on the bit, which mostly involves just climbing on top of the brace and putting my body weight on it, which is not particularly comfortable nor easy, but it does seem to work if I do something like this. And I can jam it further down in. Get some cutting going on. It's a lot more exhausting than what I was doing before. So, yeah. I have some unfortunate news. So, last night I was able to bore the second mortise, and it took forever. And then I was almost immediately very sore from last night until this morning. I'm basically fine now, but that also took an entire day to cut these two. And I'm trying to get this video done before the end of the year. If I had more time, I would do the other two by hand. I just don't. So I'm just gonna throw the bit into an electric driver and just do it. I've still got a lot of work to do on this bench, and I have like 2 days. So in an effort to right the wrong, I'm just gonna use a bad drill, I guess. Never mind. Never mind. So the technique is basically the same. It's just, now it's a drill. So I'm gonna have this to make sure I'm keeping it at the right angle, and then I'm just gonna do it. Starting straight up and down, cut the circle, and then rotate it, or pivot it. What? Huh? I might have to do this by hand. Okay, I just need to swap to a spade bit because the auger had too much fucking torque or something, I don't know. But it wouldn't work. No, this should. Like that. I'm just gonna get up on top of it. is weird. Somehow this is equally as exhausting, but as exhausting as an equivalent amount of time on the brace. So proportionally it's less exhausting, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Broken at the bottom. That's what that was. But that is definitely faster. Not arguing that. Yeah. This is why you don't build your bench out of extremely soft wood. It just kind of splinters at the end. Advice for you. Huh? Alright. Gonna do the other one. And report back to you. Okay. I bored the fourth mortise, and I slightly injured my wrist because I lost control of the drill, which wouldn't have happened if I was using a brace, but, you know, whatever. Now time for leg making. First I had to mark out the 1 1/4 inch circle of the mortise that I needed to fit the 10 into, and I'll do that with the actual bit that I used to bore the mortise. First I mark out the center, and then I put the bit onto the center and bore into it. I then mark the length of the tenon all the way around. Next, I draw some tangential lines off the circle to create some guides for how deep I need to cut with the saw. This saw cut creates a stop that makes it easier to pare down to the line. Then I came in with the scorp, which is basically a miniature draw knife, to gradually work down to the right size and an even cylinder all the way around. I used a piece of oak with a 1 1/4 inch hole bored into it as a test piece to see if it would actually fit. I then used a file to work down the knots and a spoke shave to finally work down the tenon to the right size, until the test piece fit all the way down and tightly. It's built. It stands up. It's not done, obviously. I still need to do some more work on the legs. I plan on basically tapering the leg right here, so that way, basically over time when the wood shrinks, the legs will pull themselves further up because of the wedge. It'll sink further down and the legs will just go further in over time. I still need to finish leveling the top, or flattening it out, planing it. I started doing it earlier, but then I stopped. So I need to finish doing that. And then I need to cut a slot in the legs to wedge them, so that way I can lock the leg in place. Something that I realized when I did the mock fitting earlier is that I fucked up. The two mortises that I bored by hand, they're not at the same angle. The two that I did with the drill seem to be better, but these two are not. And that means that I can't put the shelf on, because it would make it a lot more complicated and harder to build. I'm not too beat up about that. I did want that shelf, but what I realized when I was sitting on it, I wanted to put my legs underneath it, and that wouldn't be very comfortable if there was a shelf there. So, oh well, it's fine. It means I can get it done faster anyway. But that's That's what we're doing. That's my progress. We're really close.
Then I use the Scorp again to make the tapers. I tried to use painter's tape to cover the tenon and protect it from the Scorp slipping and cutting into it, but it didn't really help, and I didn't bother for the rest of it. Then I used the Scorp again to gradually work down the tapers until it was a nice smooth transition from the thickness of the tenon down to the thickness of the leg. Then I gently planed the surfaces of the legs smooth and used the spoke shave to bevel the edges. Next, I cut the slot into the tenon that would accept the wedge later, which would lock the leg into place in the bench top.
Gotta cut that on camera.
The way I was holding it was somewhat insecure, so I moved the unfinished bench top onto the bench and used the work holding slot combined with a wedge to hold the leg in place while I cut it.
So I've cut the wedges. They mostly fit, but they're a little wide, so I'm going to plane them down. And the way that I'm going to do that, I guess you can't really see it. This has got a good, probably about that much to take off. Good bit. So what I'm going to do is I have my small plane here, for number 3. I'm just going to take the wedge and run it like this until it fits. It fits. It's now the width of the, it's now about the width of the tenon. So, close enough. Alright, so now all the wedges fit, and it's time for glue up. So what I'm going to do, take the leg out, I've marked the tenon so I know which side goes in which direction, and then I'm going to put some glue on the tenon part here. I'm going to pound it with a hammer. And then put a little bit of glue into the wedge here. Like that. And we tap it. And that's the story for all of the legs. So, all the wedges are in. It is glued up. The glue hasn't dried yet, but at this point, the legs aren't going anywhere. It's basically built. So now I need to make sure that it's level, because it isn't. Without the wedges in it, it rocks pretty bad. Two of them are, I think these two legs are taller than these two, or something. So what I've done, see, I know that this bench is level. I know for a fact that it is level. So that means that I can put a level on top of this one and figure out how to make this one level, which I've done by putting all these wedges underneath the legs. And so now I know that it is currently in the position that it's in, it is level. So what that means is that with this, which is 2 blocks of wood and a pencil glued to one of them, I can now take this and mark all the way around the leg here, and that will give me a set of lines on every leg that's all the same plane. I know that all of them are level to each other, and that means that I can cut at that line on every leg and they'll all be the same length, and it will be level and steady, and it will rock, and it will be stable. The bench has a problem. Even after trimming the legs, these two are too tall.
Initially, I tried to use a chisel to shave the leg down, and that would have worked, but it would have taken forever, so I had to break out the orbital sander and take a couple passes on it until it was done.
And after a couple passes with the orbital sander, it doesn't rock anymore, which is good. I'm kind of annoyed I had to use a power tool to make it not wobbly anymore, but you know. Last step is to trim off the tops of these legs, flush cut it, and then plane it down, and then that's it. Well, you're all caught up now. And I have some bad news. It's not done. I have something coming in today for the bench, but it won't be here until after I wanted to get the video done. So it'll have to wait. It won't just be that, it'll be a couple of things. But the main construction of it is done, can be used, it does work, and I had a great time making it. It was really fun. It was a humbling experience, I think, and I kind of needed that. I think I went into it thinking that this would be maybe not easier than it was, but that I wouldn't have as much of a hard time making it as I did. And I think I needed that. I think I needed to reevaluate my skill level. I think this did a good job of doing that. I still made it. I'm still really proud of it. But yeah, I also enjoyed making this. The whole video thing was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed setting up the camera and stuff like that. Yeah. So the next video will be done probably in a couple weeks. I'm not sure. Should be something like that. It shouldn't be as long as this one either. It's just a few things. But, yeah. Anyway, see you around.